So, as Lama Shenpen was just saying in her introduction, while I was in retreat, I was looking particularly at the kind of different sources. The book that Lama Shenpen was teaching from yesterday, Self and Not Self by Joaquin Perez Ramon. And also Divine Revelation in Early Buddhism with Peter Macefield. I was going through Lama's Buddha Within thesis and also looking at Moonbeams of Mahamudra. And at some point I got really annoyed. Just listening to all these people arguing with each other about who was right and who had the highest view and what the Buddha really said and what the Buddha didn't mean. And I think I actually, at one point, I just thought, I don't want to do this anymore. I actually don't care. I don't care who's right. I don't care. I have no interest in winning an argument against other Buddhists, which seemed to be all that this was about. And it's sort of, yesterday as Lama Shenpen was saying to me, we really need to know our stuff, so that we can stand up for our view. And I thought, I don't want to. I've got no interest in holding polemical debate and winning it. The only thing that really matters to me is how to practice. I want to know what to do. I don't want to know, well, these people say that if you do this will happen, but that's not really real. And these stupid people over here from this other school have got it all wrong. And they think that if you do this, it's this that happens. Well, I just tell me what to do. Tell me what's right. And at some point, I kind of had to let go of that. I actually stopped looking completely and just went straight to the Pali sources because the arguments weren't helping. And when I looked at the Pali sources, it really helped me to, rather than seeing all these people over the centuries arguing with each other, I began to see them as really kind, learned people who were pointing out my own mistakes. Rather than arguing with each other, they were actually showing me where I was making mistakes. And that was a real shift in the way that I was approaching the teachings. Rather than thinking, those people over there who get those things wrong with their ignorant thinking, their stupid grasping, I realized, that's exactly what I'm doing. It's not those people, it's this person. So really it comes back to, if any of this reading or if any of this listening to the Dharma means anything at all, it has to be about my own experience and it has to be about my own confusion. Because if it isn't, I'm not interested. Luckily, it is. So the question is then, comes back to, well, how do you do it? Well, thankfully, from all these very kind, learned people who have really, really taken the time to reflect on what these teachings are and put them into practice, there is a path to follow. And one of the formula that comes up in the early Pali texts that you hear repeated a lot in kind of a narrative is, the Buddha appears in the world And the Buddha teaches a Dharma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. And that really kind of means something, not as a historical fact, but actually as a truth that I can apply right now, which is related to the way that the Tibetan traditions or later traditions talk about the precious human birth. It's not a precious human birth just because we are human, because we have a human body. It's precious because we were born into a world in which the Buddha came and the Buddha taught. That's what makes it precious. And it reminds me of the first verse in our Bodhicharyavatara. Now that I have this rare freedom and opportunity to practice Dharma, I have the chance to accomplish the true purpose of human birth. And if I have that chance now, what chance is there that I will have it again in the future? So just the fact that we have been born into a world where the Buddha emerged and taught the Dharma already puts us in the framework of a precious human birth. I don't mean every human being, I mean those of us in this world right now, in this mandala, have the opportunity to practice Dharma, have the opportunity to hear the Buddha's teachings. And we should take that opportunity because we don't know when we're going to get it again. And you don't have to have a kind of sophisticated view on rebirth. We might not make it to the end of this session. So let's take the opportunity while we have it. And so the reason I'm sort of talking about that is to sort of give a little hint of relaxation, which is, how do we do it? Well, first, we are already doing it. We are already in the mandala of the Buddha's presence, if you like. That's already begun the path. So we can have a certain sense of, okay, right, at least that. So, but obviously, sort of the Buddha being present is only one of the things about precious human birth. The other one is having the right faculties to understand and penetrate the meaning of the Buddha's teachings. And so that's what we develop as we get that glimpse. I'm sure that the reason why we're all here is because at some point we have heard something about this teaching that just something clicked, a moment of inspiration, a moment of the heart awakening, and we decided, whether, on a spectrum of, oh my God, that's it, I've got to follow this through, to, oh, that sounds interesting, I might look a little bit more into that. Whatever it is, just that moment of movement of the heart towards this deeper sense of what the Buddha might have been talking about. So if we're here, we're already on the path, and we've already begun the process of moving away from the mandala of confusion to the mandala of awakening, which is really all the Buddha is ever talking about. It makes it very clear in many suttas. I'm only teaching this one thing, or two things, dukkha and the cessation of dukkha. So we are only ever, whenever we're practicing the Dharma, it's about moving from this mandala of confusion to the mandala of awakening. Which sort of brings up one of the next recollections or ways of approaching the Dharma, is turning the mind away from samsara, which we sing in the mornings. So we reflect on the preciousness of the human birth, and also then the turning the mind away from samsara. And so that's what most, or the majority of the early Buddhist texts are talking about, is what is that we are turning away from? This sort of brings up, if you were here at the last weekend's teaching, this is what that whole weekend was about, really. We are turning away from dukkha. We are turning away from that which is impermanent, because that which is impermanent is suffering, is dukkha. So the question is, what is impermanent? And that comes to sort of the real topic of the weekend. That which is impermanent is classed as the all, the world, the eye and everything the eye sees, the nose and everything the nose smells, the ear and everything the ears hear, the tongue and everything the tongue tastes, and the mind and everything the mind thinks. All of that is included here. And you could say that actually, when we're talking about skandhas, all of that is form. The body and the environment. Whatever form, internal, external. Whatever form, past, present, future, near, far, subtle, gross. So this is a kind of a repeated formula over and over again that the Buddha keeps saying in all these Pali texts. This is form. And the other skandhas, feeling, perception, formations and consciousness, sort of relate to that. That's what we add on to that. And all of this is dependent on wrong view. That's quite a shock to think in that way. All of it is dependent on not seeing the true nature of reality as it really is. Because we don't see it, there are form. There are appearances. And all of this, because it has the nature of arising, it also has the nature of fading away. It takes birth, it dies. But because it's impermanent, it is dukkha. This comes through again and again and again in the texts. And maybe maybe something that I could sort of bring in, I'll come back to a little bit later, is often when the Buddha's talking, he gets to the point where he says, so this form, these appearances, are they permanent or impermanent? Well, they're impermanent. And if they're impermanent, are they dukkha or sukha? They're dukkha. Well, if they're impermanent and dukkha, subject to change, they are not fit to be regarded as me, mine, or the self. And it's sort of trotted out like that, like, okay, so you just know that. Yeah, right, so form is impermanent, of course. So is it dukkha or sukha? Oh, well, if that's the definition we're giving, well, in that case, it's dukkha. And somehow it's kind of like, you could almost read it as though this is just kind of known. But as I've gone back again and again and again, it becomes more and more clear that this is where we get to what we might call in the Mahamudra tradition. These are where we start having the pointing out instructions. So we don't just take it as, this is something I think. Because it's impermanent, it is dukkha. But we don't realize that. And so we grasp onto it. We grasp onto it through desiring it, those appearances, and then we create our whole views about self, views about reality, views about time, views about self and other. All of those come under this mistaken view of what reality is. And because we don't see it, we're continually perpetuating it, getting more and more confused. So any view that we have about the self that comes from grasping onto anything that appears is going to be wrong view. It is going to be confusion. So all of this has to be not self. Because it's confused, it's compounded, it's conditioned. So if it's conditioned, all of these dharmas are conditioned. If they're conditioned, they're impermanent. If they're impermanent, they're not self. So that's quite it's quite a shock to think that all of it, all of our what we take to be our experience is a mistake, and that mistake perpetuates suffering. And that's the message that keeps coming back in the Pali sources again and again. A question often comes up as well. So these skandhas, let's say these appearances, and the way that we feel about those appearances, what we create out of those appearances, are they one thing and the grasping another? And the Buddha says, no, you can't say that that's one thing and the grasping is another, because they are dependent on each other. If there is grasping, there will be those. If there is those, there will be grasping. This whole thing, this mandala of dukkha, is called Mara's realm. And I like that. It is the mandala of Mara. This is what we're turning away from in turning the mind away from samsara. It's not just kind of, stopping doing the things we like. Oh yeah, I get locked into a 4-hour Netflix session. That's samsara. Well, no, actually. It's far more subtle than that we're talking. The eye is Mara, the sight is Mara, eye consciousness is Mara, nose, tongue, smell, taste, all of that kind of stuff. All of that is the realm of Mara. It's all conditioned, it's all impermanent, it will all end in death and perpetuating. And this message is not given once or twice. It floods hundreds and hundreds of suttas. So it would seem as though it's quite important. And maybe it got a bit too much importance. Because it starts to sound like, well, that's all there is. It's if all dharmas are impermanent. But, thankfully, it also comes up to say, but it is the worldly person, the uninstructed person, the person who hasn't heard the Dharma, hasn't understood it, and that actually also includes monks, by the way. So it's not just, your sort of lay people. It's anyone who hasn't really heard the Dharma, hasn't really penetrated its meaning, hasn't really understood what the Aryas have understood. They all take... All of the worldly person takes all of these impermanent things with wrong view and identifies with them. They think, I am this, that is me, it is mine, or it is the self. And anyone who has a view on reality or anyone who has a view on self are constructing it based on this mistaken view of reality. So you have those first three that Lama mentioned yesterday, actually, the four seals. So all compounded dharmas are impermanent. All impermanent, everything that is impermanent is dukkha. And what is dukkha is not fit to be regarded as self. And then the Buddha makes it quite clear. But thankfully, there is the unconditioned, the non-compounded. If there wasn't, there would be no purpose for following the holy life. But thankfully, because there is a purpose. So that makes it worth following the path. And what is the path to the unconditioned? Shamatha Vipassana. So we come back to where the Mahamudra, moonbeams of Mahamudra kicks in. Shamatha Vipassana. That's the thing to spend our time on. If we really want to go from not seeing it as it truly is to seeing it as it truly is, it's the path of Shamatha Vipassana. So, if we want to move from the way that the uninstructed, the worldly person, the person who hasn't seen the Dharma, if we want to move from the way they see the world to the way the Aryas see it, there's a difference in the way that we're looking. The instructed look at the world with right understanding, which is based on right view, right meditation. So for us, we're training to develop that kind of vision, I suppose. So I suppose that that's really where our path, the sort of, say our path really starts to unfold. We have had enough of that glimpse of the mandala of suffering to want to align with the mandala of awakening. Because we've seen that the mandala of suffering has no way out. So we align with the mandala of awakening. And the mandala of awakening is where we begin to develop those faculties that I mentioned earlier about the precious human birth. Faculties of faith, mindfulness, prajna, virya and samadhi. So that's the aligning with the mandala of awakening is aligning and developing those faculties. In right at the beginning of Moonbeams, or quite early on in the Moonbeams, Gampopa says the causes of Shamatha Vipassana are receiving the adhisthana of the Guru, understanding dependent origination, accumulation of punya and jnana, or accumulation of punya and purification of obscurations. So we could say that that's our, that's a good framework for the path. And it's a spiral process, as Lama often points out. This is spiral learning. So the way that we're relying on the adhisthana of the Buddha, we're in this position of listening, opening ourselves to receive the wisdom of the teacher, the presence of awakening itself. And that's what I found has been really beneficial, listening to my own teachings that Shenpen has been giving us and Khenpo Rinpoche, reflecting on those, reading what's been written in these Pali texts. And then so the listening and the reflecting is developing that kind of, there's something about, I'm getting more and more ideas of, let's say, coordinates that point towards view. Then I meditate and I look directly at my own experience. How do these two match up? Where don't they match up? And then that feeds into everyday life. That actually aligning with the mandala of awakening is not about just sitting on the cushion. In order to really start to penetrate the meaning of the teachings, we really need to move towards a mind that is clear and open and stable. And I don't know about you, but when I sit down to meditate, my mind isn't always clear, open and stable. So the spiral process is when the Buddha starts teaching, before he gives these kinds of pointing out instructions, he makes it clear, he gives long discourse on the importance of ethical behavior. And it's not, what I'm picking out of it is, it's not about abiding by the rules. It's about aligning with the mandala of awakening, the mandala of life. It's about recognizing our deep, intimate connections with others and reality itself. Because when we're not living in a way that is harmonious with the world, it is disturbing for us and for others, and that has an effect on when we sit, the clarity of our mind. So the wholesome actions of body, speech and mind to protect and respect life is definitely turning away from Mara. So we protect others, respecting others, acting with generosity, speaking in ways that are harmonious and connecting and truthful and meaningful, and noticing when our mind goes into grasping and desire and hate and ill will, and we notice those and cultivate loving kindness. That's not... The rules are just mere ethics, the Buddha likes to say. You don't praise the Buddha for being ethical. You praise the Buddha for being able to see the subtle dharmas. But in order to see the subtle dharmas, we really need to have that stability and openness and clarity of the shamatha practice. But we can only get that if we're able, when we sit, that our mind isn't tormented by ill will, busyness, agitation, dullness. So we behave in the world, cultivating loving kindness, taking that time so that when we sit, we have let's say, we've developed the faculty of mindfulness enough that we are able to take our mind as the path, that we're able to actually look into it and not get sucked into those various disturbing mandalas. And spiral. So, when we are able to sit with enough mindfulness, enough ease, maybe this is where act as a balance to the daily life practice. Sometimes it's going to be really helpful for us to spend time in retreat. And Khenpo Rinpoche said about the Awakened Heart Sangha, we will practice the austerities of living in the world, and then sometimes we'll have time in retreat. So when we're in retreat, the time in retreat is really helpful because we can drop those, what does it say in the Metta Sutta? unburdened by duties, that we're not caught up in the busyness of the world. And it's then that we can really start to look at our experience without getting caught. So that's where our formless meditation comes in. We sit down on the cushion and we take our mind as our practice, and we're moving towards this level of equanimity, the mindfulness that recognizes when we've slipped into dullness or agitation, and enough exertion to bring it to this quality of equanimity, whereby our mind has the pliancy and stability that we can look directly at our experience. And that's where we start seeing with the right kind of looking. Now, when we look, we can ask these questions. When I take appearances, what do I think about my relationship to them? Do I think that this is me? Do I think my body is me? Do I think it's mine? Do I think that somehow I am in it? Do I think I am in the world? And this is where those instructions in the text come in really handy. The Satipatthana Sutta says you contemplate the body internally and externally. Look at all appearances. Are they internal? Are they inside the mind? Or are they outside the mind? How would I know? Do I think they're near or far? Can I break them up into pieces? What is an appearance made out of? Do I think the mind is one thing and the appearance is another? And these formula come up time and time again. And they're just thrown away in the Pali texts. And this is where Lama and I have had these conversations. It sounds as though this is just a formula, but actually this is where you would have somebody to come back to. So you look, going back to that earlier question, do I think form is permanent or impermanent? Go away and look. Look in your meditation, not as an idea that you have about it, not as an assumption you have about form. What actually is form? Does it arise? Is it impermanent? What makes it arise? What makes it cease? These are the questions that actually our meditation is needed for. And it would be very easy to read these texts and just go, yeah, okay, yeah, seen that, next. Yeah, no, of course it's not inside or outside. Yeah. When the Buddha's talking to his students, they get awakened at that moment. And I don't know about you, but I've pretty much read them time and time again, and I can tell you that form is impermanent, and I'm not awakened. So something is different between the way that they talk about impermanence and the way that I talk about impermanence. it gets to this point within the formula where it says, okay, so having seen form, having seen appearances as they truly are, and this is the same for all of the skandhas, you've seen they're impermanent, you have seen they are not fit to be regarded as me or mine, as the self. It's then that you become disillusioned with form. And this is a really interesting area. The Aryas see form is illusion like foam and like a plantain tree. It has no essence. And this is it comes up time and time again, not just in the Pali texts. We've all heard those things like foam, like a mirage, like bubbles, and this is when you see form as it really is. This is not having an idea about what it is. You have seen it with complete understanding. And for us, we might get a glimpse of that, and then we solidify it again, which is why we sort of have to keep coming around again and again and again. We get a glimpse of it, and then we solidify. And it's because we haven't really yet given up those bonds of it either exists or it doesn't exist. And this brings us back to the Kachayana Gota Sutta. The world, and by the world we're going back to all of those appearances, is shackled, is bound by this duality. Either it exists or it doesn't exist. That's what binds us to it. We create our whole view of reality on either it exists or it doesn't exist. So when you see, with the right kind of vision, the right understanding, the arising of the world, you wouldn't have the notion that it didn't exist. It's a really interesting sentence. It reminds me of the way that the bodhisattvas who have seen emptiness don't dismiss our suffering. They've seen the arising of the world as it really is. They don't say that it doesn't exist because it is suffering, because people suffer, because we're suffering. But when you see the cessation of that world, you wouldn't have the notion that it existed. So you see it without free from grasping at views. And I think this duality of existent or non-existent is then shown up in the next line, which is when you see with correct vision, you have no doubt. And this comes back to us. We might get a glimpse of it, but eventually we need absolute certainty. What arises is just dukkha arising. If it arises, it's dukkha. It's dukkha because it's wrong view. It's wrong view, there is grasping. But when it ceases, it was only dukkha ceasing. Because now there is no wrong view, there is no dukkha. So we see all appearances are an illusion. We no longer cling to self. We no longer have wrong ideas of self or the world. And we are freed from the bonds of duality, the shackles of duality, which are in that Kachayana Gota Sutta. They're also in a song. I know all appearances are like an illusion. The sickness of clinging to self is gone. Samsara's chains of duality no longer bind me. And I've conquered the capital of unchanging Dharmakaya. All in that verse. That whole bit of the Kachanagota Sutta in that verse. So when we have this experience of no longer being enchanted, no longer buying into the illusion, this becomes the word in Pali is nibindati. It is translated as revulsion, disillusionment, disenchantment. And interestingly, my conversations with Lama Shempen have said that that moment of revulsion is really the first real moment of renunciation. It is actually, I think Lama Shempen says, Shenpa Lokpa, vomiting, being sick. It is actually revulsion in the Mahamudra, Dorje Chang Tungma. Revulsion is the feat of meditation. This is now the ground for our meditation, is we've seen seen through the illusion. And that's really giving up. That's really letting go. Now we can begin the path. So what have we been doing up until then? If actually now's the time when we begin the path. Well, luckily, because we now no longer have views about anything, or at least we've seen the illusion of holding views, we also see the illusion of holding views about time. So when you're disillusioned, then the next word is viraga, that is to be free from sometimes it's fading, sometimes it's passionless. You no longer are driven by passion for the illusion. And that's when liberation can take place. That's when wisdom takes place. And this is what the Buddha's teaching, is this middle way. Once you've seen what's in the Kachanagota Sutta with right understanding, the origin of the world as it really is, and the cessation of the world as it really is, you don't have the notion of existence or non-existence. That's the middle way, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to, well, it's actually vijja, jnana, peace, direct knowledge. That is enlightenment. The seeing and the knowing is enlightenment. Easy. I don't think I've got anything else to say, so maybe we can sing that verse 3 times. It's only got 4 lines. So I'll sing it 3 times. I reckon you should be able to catch up by the 3rd line. And then I'll bring Lama Shempen in. I know all appearances are like an illusion. The sickness of clinging to self is gone. Samsara's chains of duality no longer bind me, and I've conquered the capital of unchanging Dharmakaya. I know all appearances are like an illusion. The sickness of clinging to self is gone. Samsara's chains of duality no longer bind me, and I've conquered the capital of unchanging Dharmakaya. I know all appearances are like an illusion. The sickness of clinging to self is gone. Samsara's chains of duality no longer bind me, and I've conquered the capital of unchanging Dharmakaya. So thank you very much, everyone. That's the end of what I've got to say, but maybe I can introduce Lama Shimpen and ask if you'd like to add anything or clarify anything.
Well, thank you, Dashu. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's I really enjoyed listening to that and the clarity of that, and the confidence that comes from reading those sutras over and over again and getting really familiar with their structure, and as you say, the message comes through again and again so clearly. And I liked very much what you were saying about it's not about, disputes with other people. It's about recognizing that this is what we're doing. And it's what Khenpo Rinpoche is doing in Progressive Stages of Meditation on Emptiness. Although he's using the headings of the different schools, it's not really about, did that school really teach that or not? It's just a convenient reference for a particular view that we actually have. And I think that's the challenge here. And I liked very much the way you were emphasizing how challenging even quite simple and seemingly obvious things are if we actually follow through on their implications, even such a simple thing as impermanence. It seems like, well, yeah, we all know impermanence. My father was talking about impermanence, but it didn't get him anywhere because he didn't really look at it enough and carefully enough. And I've been thinking overnight about those kind of teachings and realizing they take a long time to really recognize the full significance of what are we really experiencing, what are we really seeing, if we're really honest. We say, oh yeah, it's impermanence, it's changed. It has changed. What was it? What was it that then became something else? And then you think, and is the thing it became still it? Or is it something else? And if you look at that experientially rather than philosophically, if you just kind of experience one thing, it's already difficult. And then to notice, but all the time I'm living as if there were things. And if there weren't things, what would my life be? Like if it was really nothing, so it can't be nothing, but any concept I have of it doesn't work. And this is where the meditation instruction comes in, and what all the texts are pointing to, that mind we started with, and that's what Dashu's been emphasizing all along, the mind we start with, where we think this is our world, we know what it is, that mind that we start with is already wrapped in wrong views, which are the dukkha already. It's not that it's coming, it's here. I really think you put that over so clearly, and I hope it's inspired people to want to kind of go to every little bit of it again and again and again, to just look at your experience. And these teachings, it really helps you to see this contrast between what I think is real, and then when I think again can't be. And then, as he said, and that's the beginning of the path, to get to that point where you really really recognize that's not going to work and it's actually suffering. I mean, it's a long journey to get to that first point. But I thought, and I also appreciated, Dashu, the way you led us up to it in that the way that the Buddha would have done, putting it in context. This is about entering the mandala of awakening. it's not like hopeless because you can't understand it. You know, we're already making steps towards that, and we will be held in that by that mandala that we're entering, and why all those actions that tie us to the mandala of awakening are so important. I mean, I think you mentioned in passing punya and purification, you know, like if you live with Tibetans, or at least practicing Tibetans, their every other sentence is about punya. You know, like, well, I'm making punya, so that's good. You know, as long as I'm making punya, so it's good. And you know, that's if I suffer something and I'm practicing patience as I'm suffering, then I'm purifying that karma, my past karma. So I'm making progress on the path, and it produces a cultural context where you feel very positive all the time, because you're either accumulating punya, which is getting you into that mandala of awakening, or you're sort of paying back your past actions by suffering in this life and taking it patiently. So whatever you're doing, you're always making progress on the path. You know, this is a gathering of punya, and when there's enough of that, you'll have the stability and the clarity and the openness and honesty to be able to actually see things as they are. And it's really nice to hear you saying it so clearly, Dashu, and leaving out a lot of the superfluous detail and just getting to the point. Very good. I was enjoying that a lot.
Well, there's something maybe I wanted to bring in, which comes back to something you just mentioned, which is the importance of having others on the path, and particularly our teachers, because as I was reading through these texts, the meditations that they talk about imply something different than what you end up seeing, which is you get meditations on, let's say, on the body, and the meditation on the body breaks it all up into pieces. Or you get meditations on the skandhas, breaking them all up into pieces. And it implies that it is possible to find these pieces and break them up into other pieces. And I think that that's where having the teacher is necessary, because you actually come back and say, okay, so I've broken up into the pieces. And the teacher would go, well, you haven't seen it then, because actually you can't break it up into pieces. You need to meditate to the point where you can't do it. You can't manage that. It's an inseparable totality. It's all of a piece, as Lava Shempen would say. So then when you've got the teacher saying it's all of a piece and your meditation is breaking it up into pieces, well, in that case, I haven't gone far enough. But if you were just to read those instructions without having somebody to come back to, you know, without listening to the wisdom of those people who have seen further, you know, and that's that part of aligning with the mandala and receiving the teachings and receiving the blessing. It seems to be of utmost importance.
Yeah. And what's interesting about what you just said is that, especially in traditional societies and Tibetans, the way they teach is they don't tell you the answer before you've got there. So you're only taught the first thing, and then the teacher has control over what you learn next. So you don't hear any of the high teachings until you've had the lower ones. Whereas we get it all dumped on us at once, or we chase after it all at once. So then you might think, oh, well, we have a disadvantage because we're kind of given the answers before we begin, because we've already got the idea. There's, you know, for example, it's all impermanent, or there's no self, or it doesn't arise, or whatever it is. We've already got the answer, so hasn't that spoiled it for us? And it's interesting because actually, strangely enough, it doesn't spoil it, because what we're really trying to learn, and what I found my teachers are doing, what I'm trying to do with my students, is to catch them in the act. It's almost like you're catching yourself in the act. So you kind of, okay, it's impermanent, so what are you doing now? You're kind of, I think I know that, so okay, I think I know that. So what is that? That's a thought. What is it you think you know? And then you actually, oh, now I feel confused. Okay, so you feel confused. Are you confused? You know, how do you know you're confused? What is there in your experience that's telling you you're confused? So you can actually stop doing it just by noticing what you're doing. The more you notice what you're doing, the more you notice I keep making things up. That's why I like, for samskara, I like making things up. Because it means to make. And we keep making things up. Oh, I'm confused. We think we think we're seeing something. No, we just made something up. We just made up this idea, I'm confused. You weren't really looking to see what that was, what that experience is. Just touching in on what it is. And really, it's when I'm with a person face to face or one to one, I think it's more true, because it can happen through Zoom or something like that. When you're talking face to face or even hearing, you can hear by the tone of voice or the body language or the pause or the lack of a pause or the hesitation or lack of hesitation. You can tell if the person is actually really looking or making something up. And so you can help the person to recognize that distinction. And what's interesting is when you're not making something up, you don't sort of say, well, it's just. That's a clear body language for I'm making something up. Because when you're really looking, you go, oh. Sort of like, oh. And there's real coming alive in a sense of, something kind of dropping away and something opening up, and I'm going to need to look at that again and again. I'm going to keep having to go back to that. And that's the point at which you can think, okay, so you've really got a glimpse of something now. And often it's like, almost like for the first time you recognise you don't know. But you can even make something up there. You can say, oh, it's about not knowing. And you know immediately you've made that into something. You're not going to look at not knowing because you know about not knowing. And it's become your little label that you put on everything so that you don't have to look at it properly. I mean, this goes on endlessly. And that's why I really like the way you picked up on what I've been saying about spiral learning. Because you keep coming back to the same place again and again and again and again. And it's never quite the same. Sometimes we get that real alive feeling, and then sometimes we get the so what feeling. And we come round again and come down again, and then over time, I can tell you, from my own experience, over time it gets more and more interesting. More and more interesting. Yeah, more and more alive, and you see the implications of it and the significance of it, and how true what the Buddha said was, like he said it as it was, and it was just so what we need to hear, if only we could hear. Yeah.
So I can let people know that on the website there is, I've sort of put my research, my study notes on the website with kind of links to the suttas so that people can go and take a look themselves. Obviously, it's not exhaustive. If you want the exhaustive one, just read all of them. The whole, the whole Nikaya, the whole of the Mahamudra text, just read them all. And also then I sort of put another map up like this that I've been using as my sort of crib sheet there, the path. And that also, all of the circles on the website, if you download it, you can click on that and that'll also take you to the suttas that I was referring to. Rather than sort of going into detail about each one of them, I thought you can look it up yourself. So.
Oh, that's a wonderful resource. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering whether to ask you to talk that through, but it seems like we just have to go to the site and...
Well, that's actually what I was talking through.
You were, weren't you?
Yes. Thankfully. Otherwise, it'll be another hour's talk.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's just like, I was following it round. Yeah, I think I can follow it round from your talk. Even me. And I'm not very good on diagrams. That's great.
Thank you. Should we dedicate? We dedicate this punya to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings realize complete and perfect awakening. May the heart's awareness awaken in the unawakened. Where it has begun to stir, may it never fade, and may it awaken fully. Chanju zemni rimboje mache panam chechujik cheba nyamba me padang gane gandu pelwashu. Chanjub semni rimboje mache panam chejujik cheba nyamba me padang gane gandu pelwashu. Chanjub semni rimboje mache panam chejujik cheba nyamba me padang gane gandu pelwashu.